What's going on, everybody? Sam Shapiro back here with more of your Heat latest on FanArc. Don't forget to drop a like on this video and, of course, subscribe to our channel for great daily content, all pertaining to your Miami Heat right here Monday through Friday. There are a ton of free agents still on the block that aren't going to suit up in time for the beginning of the regular season, at least in the NBA at this point in time. And I saw this post put out by ESPN of just some notable free agents that I kind of want to dive into that I think could potentially be a little bit of a saving grace for in some scenarios, at least for Miami's roster right now, given the point in time where we are just kind of with the health of the overall team, and now potentially with the situation, especially at point guard, looking potentially very concerning for Miami in the grand scheme of things. I think right now is definitely a very interesting time to revisit a conversation I brought up over the summer, and potentially Miami looking towards maybe picking up a guy like Russell Westbrook or Victor Oladipo to fulfill that need, at least in Miami's backcourt at this point in time. Definitely have a lot of options that have kind of been plug and playing throughout the preseason and training camp so far. But I think right now it's definitely a little bit more of a logical, I think, choice to maybe consider a guy like Russell Westbrook to potentially join the Miami Heat at this point in time. Again, I mentioned this in some episodes over the summer. He's coming off a 13-5-6 season with the Denver Nuggets last year, off 45% shooting in 27 minutes of play. And granted, he's nowhere near the MVP type of player he once was, obviously, now being 36 years old, going through a plethora of injuries throughout his career. But having a veteran guard like this in Miami's backcourt, especially without Tyler Herro in the picture, and really the only promising guard at this point in time, at least that can consistently play the one spot, being Kasparas Jakučonas. He's kind of too young to fulfill, I think, a full-time starting role just yet, although he is one of the best passers that Miami, I feel like, has seen in a very, very long time. I think Westbrook could be a great veteran piece that could fulfill a need, especially with question marks surrounding Terry Rozier and what that's going to look like if Miami decides to ultimately waive him or not. I don't know how Miami would kind of wiggle a deal out of getting Westbrook into the rotation, but that would also kind of put, at least, I mean, adding any of these players would really kind of put a shamble in, I guess, potentially bringing in another one of these younger two-way guys that Miami is maybe considering on keeping for the long haul. But I think Oladipo, Miami voicing one of those teams that was interested in potentially having a reunion with the combo guard, so to speak. He's more of a shooting guard, I think, but I think he could also play the one in certain scenarios as well. But again, with Tyler Herro being out, this raises a lot of question marks for potentially Miami maybe bringing in a guard that has NBA experience already. And although Oladipo, 33 years old, and in that last season with Miami, not necessarily playing well, coming off an 11-3-3 respectively season with Miami back in 2022-23, this could make a good recipe for Oladipo to potentially come in. But kind of looking at least that stat line, there's kind of some reminiscence of pretty much him fulfilling the exact need that, or kind of being a very similar player on paper to Terry Rozier. Although I do think Oladipo, when it's all said and done, has a higher ceiling than Rozier and could potentially bolster better play for Miami in the grand scheme of things if he were to return and it were to work out and be a Cinderella glass slipper type of fit. But I could maybe see any two of these guards, at least at this point in time right now, being a solid slapping a Band-Aid on a gashing wound type of scenario for Miami, and maybe being another veteran piece that could potentially be a glue guy for Miami, could help bring in, or could really help kind of, mentor a lot of these younger guys into stepping up, but also filling a niche when, quite honestly, the only other point guard or true point guard that you have in the rotation, being Drew Smith, can't really step up and play in certain scenarios despite battling back from this Achilles injury last year. It really kind of begs the question, are any of these two guards a logical answer to maybe bring in now more than ever, because Miami, being such a young team, could maybe use some veteran experience on that side in a position where there are a lot of question marks right now. So drop in the comments if you think either adding Russ or Oladipo could potentially help Miami in the long run. And now moving over to another option and I'm not saying Miami should consider either of these two players I'm going to mention next, but definitely two guys going into this season not signed with any teams and aren't going to be suiting up, at least at this point in time, for the tip-off of the regular season this year. One being DeAndre Jordan, and quite honestly, he's a bit washed in my opinion at this point, kind of really only playing about 10 to 12 minutes in his last stint with the Denver Nuggets, but he was still averaging 5 rebounds in that time of play, which for 12 minutes, that's pretty good and pretty reminiscent of what we kind of saw at least in the entirety of his career. One of the most prominent rebounders in the NBA during the peak of his career. And quite honestly, in terms of the shots he was taking, I mean, the majority of them being directly under the basket, he was still shooting at roughly around a 71% clip in his prime. And, I will say, again, I'm not saying at 36 years old, DeAndre Jordan is going to come out and be, a focal big man that could potentially really, really add to Miami's rotation. But if they needed a big man that could at least offer some support in the grand scheme of things, this isn't a bad option to look at either. I mean, if you're kind of comparing him to what roles he could potentially fulfill on the team, him and Vlad Golden look very similar and on paper to the type of role that they would really be able to fulfill for this team. And so I think that potentially looking at a guy like DeAndre Jordan, if Miami was not, confident and set in stone on, really going all in on a guy like Vlad Golden in the grand scheme of things, I just think would be, could potentially maybe be another veteran glue guy type piece, almost kind of fulfilling a role like we had seen with Kevin Love before he departed out, being one of those veteran glue guys that could not only, come in and make not only bolster at least the rebounding department, but could, really bring these young guys together, show them the ropes a little bit, and show them what it really means to be in the NBA and on a successful winning team. Because although the Clippers couldn't really get over the hump, at least I'm talking more in the prime points of DeAndre Jordan's career, I think he's definitely a big man that could help out at least in the rebounding department. And if Bam's out, I mean, that's definitely going to be another piece that Miami could potentially benefit from, considering Jordan's not going to be suiting up for any team, at least at this point in time. But it also kind of begs the question, is another big man that Miami could really look at, would Bol potentially be one of those guys as well? Could he be a unicorn in the rotation? I know a lot of people definitely hype on him because of the frame he kind of boasts. A 7'3" big man is definitely something you don't want to overlook, but in the grand scheme of just his overall health, his motor ability, yeah, for a big man, I would say he's a little bit more athletic for a guy that can move at 7'3", which is why I would kind of qualify him as a unicorn, so to speak. But the guy hasn't averaged more than 9 points a game in an entire season he's played in the NBA so far. And quite honestly, I just think that out of the 6 years that he's played in the league so far, he hasn't really shown a whole lot in terms of what he could bring to the table, which again, why I think he might make a decent free agent piece to potentially add to Miami's rotation, at least on the back end of it. But having picturing Bol and Kel'el Ware in Miami's front court, having two big guys like that is definitely an intimidating thing for a lot of NBA offenses, I feel like, to go up against. And I'm not saying Bol is a super talented player. He's shown flashes of being, a dominant player in certain scenarios, but because he just can't stay healthy and he really hasn't shown flashes of really being an all-star type of player, at least at any point in time in his NBA career so far, I don't think this is an option that I think would really, really bolster Miami. But if they needed to add a guy to really throw in the front court and potentially add some value to the team in the grand scheme of things, definitely could be one of those guys at the end of the rotation that could, maybe help fix some kinks in the armor. I don't think defensively he's necessarily the best option. I think Jordan would probably be a better option defensively for this Miami team. But I just thought, a 7'3" free agent, son of Manute Bol, I mean, definitely a solid option. I think that could, if Miami was in a pinch and needed to sign a big man and wasn't really sold on Vlad Golden, could maybe step up and fulfill that role a little bit better, at least in the rebounding department, than he could in potential certain scenarios. But however, I do see the argument for wanting to stick with Golden. He's already been gelling with the team. He's a lot younger. He's got a lot more to prove. And I necessarily think that, although Bol kind of has some NBA seasons under his belt, he doesn't really have a whole lot to show for it. And now moving over to some other potential options Miami could invest in regarding their backcourt. Markelle Fultz and Mac McClung, definitely two other backcourt options I think could be a little bit of an interesting experience for Miami. I know Fultz has kind of had a very interesting NBA career, formerly being the first overall pick to the Philadelphia 76ers and then not really living up to the hype, but then slowly kind of developing with the Magic over his time there. I think averaging around 12 points per game when it was all said and done, or it might have been around more like 14 points per game. But in this last season with Sacramento, he didn't really have a whole lot to show for it, not really contributing to the success of the team. But he definitely has NBA experience over a guy like Matt McClung, who I do think is a dynamic playmaker. Yes, he has 3 slam dunk championships to his name, and he's definitely that guy that could, I feel like, come into certain games, get the team excited, get the pace going, and really, hype the team up with an explosive highlight dunk. But quite honestly, the only thing he really has to show for it is his G League career, where over his last 2 seasons with the Orlando Magic G League affiliate team, yes, he'd averaged 25 points per game consistently, has shown flashes of him potentially being a dominant guard, at least in some form of NBA basketball, if that's what you want to call it, but he doesn't really have a whole lot of NBA experience to show for it. And when you have a guy like Ethan Thompson on your bench, and then you're also considering guys like Gabe Madsen as well, it just kind of, and even Jameer Young. I mean, those are 3 guys that were kind of in very similar positions to McClung that I just think that, potentially could be better options than maybe Miami bringing in another player like that and then, stirring that pot even more and saying, okay, well, maybe Mac McClung could really be that difference maker type of player for Miami. But I think if Miami's looking for a seasoned playmaker out of these 2, Fultz would be a little bit of a better option and could honestly be an interesting player to see at point guard, considering Miami's really only, I think, consistent playmaker right now being Kasper Siakam, but he's also a rookie with a lot to prove, and there are a lot of question marks to how he's going to integrate into this Miami team, what his role is going to look like, especially with the absence of Tyler Herro, question marks over if Terry Rozier is going to be healthy or not. So these are 2 guys that I think could potentially add some playmaking or highlight exciting ability to Miami's team in the event that a lot of these two-way players for Miami is not necessarily what they end up wanting to go with. But drop in the comments if you think any of these players that I had just mentioned that are going to be free agents going into the beginning of this NBA season could bolster Miami's rotation or roster in any way, shape, or form, because I thought it was absolutely crazy at least to see Russ and Oladipo are not going to be at least on a team at this point in time going into the beginning of the NBA season, because I do think they're very talented. I think DeAndre Jordan's a little bit washed. He's kind of old. He's a little bit towards the end of his career. And Bol hasn't really matched anywhere near his potential in terms of what a lot of people thought his ceiling was going to be. And then Fultz, honestly not really a very exciting player. Matt McClung obviously has his highlight moments, but hasn't really shown a lot in terms of being a viable NBA player at this point in time. So if I were to pick any of these players, I would want to go with Russell Westbrook at this point in time. I'd kind of mentioned that over the summer, but I don't think the idea of ruling out a reunion between Miami and Oladipo would be the worst idea, at least at this point in time. But once again, drop in the comments what you think. If any of these players I had mentioned in this episode could bolster Miami's roster, any of these free agents right now could potentially give a boost to Miami's rotation in some way, shape, or form. But that's going to do it for today's episode of your Heat Latest here on FanArc. Don't forget to drop a like on this video and, of course, subscribe to our channel for great daily content, all pertaining to your Miami Heat right here Monday through Friday. Thanks so much for joining us on this Wednesday. I'm Sam Shapiro. Have a great day.